Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia, and I am your host today. And my special guest is Larry Hughes, and his company is LHJ Compliance Consulting. So, Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. Well, first of all, Dana, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I live for this kind of stuff, talking about compliance. I love it. Yes, I'm strange, but thanks for allowing me to share some of the information that I know and love. So I've been in the security business 20 years. Notably, one of my positions, which was very, very cool. The current one is very cool, don't get me wrong, but one of my notable positions was I was in charge of information security, enterprise and retail at Amazon.com for 3 years. I've been a consultant, I've had a startup, and the last 5 years I've been in governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC, focused primarily on FedRAMP, and currently I'm beginning to focus on CMMC, which is really cool stuff.
I think all you need to do is get a button made up that says, I protected Amazon cybersecurity, and that's it. That's all you need to say.
Yeah, they'd probably kill me if I did that.
All right, so today we are going to talk about NIST and what in the world it has to do with being involved in security. So why don't you do a little bit of explaining about how NIST got involved in all this?
Sure. So NIST has been around for over 100 years. It's an organization that was created under congressional order. And sometimes you need an act of Congress to get some good things done. And in this case, NIST was brought about that way. You can think of it primarily as a body that measures things like weights and measures, which was important early on. Nowadays, it's evolved quite a bit, of course, over 100 years. The first NIST work that they published that had anything remotely to do with security was in 1974. In the 1990s, they began to get a little earnest in it, and really here in the 2010s, early 2021, it's cybersecurity has been extremely, extremely important to them. They've published hundreds of publication documents about cybersecurity, several security standards, all of which are related. We're here to talk about 800-171, which is specific to CMMC.
Exactly. So what are we going to talk about specifically with 800-171 as far as how it maybe relates to people now and how it may relate to people trying to do CMMC?
Yeah, so this is really important. So how it relates to people now, anybody who says that it doesn't relate to them at all, as in 0%, they're actually wrong. And the reason they're wrong is since 2017, the Department of Defense has been requiring contractually that it's all of their 300,000 suppliers, and it is 300,000, it's been requiring that all of them comply with the NIST 800-171 standard. That's not CMMC. CMMC is a little bit different, built upon 800-171. What I'm talking about here is for controlled, unclassified information. Since 2017, you are supposed to be protecting information that they call CUI, and very, very few companies have been doing that. The DOD has never come out and said, hey, out of our 300,000, it's X who are. Anecdotally, I've heard that it's about 1%, which is a very small number of companies. And so ideally, you would be complying. You probably aren't. If you aren't, then for CMMC purposes, you're really starting from scratch, which is, that's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a lot of work, because if you're not doing anything and the DOD is basing the framework kind of around, 800-171, they're assuming it shouldn't be that big of a jump. But if you haven't been doing anything and you have to start there, that's going to be a lot.
That's right. Right.
Okay, so control families. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so 800-171 is comprised of 17 control families. Just think of these as categories, and 110 controls. When I say control, what I mean is a control is a countermeasure against one or more threats. So controls can be things like policies, They could be things like firewalls. They're not always technical. They could be like things like processes, and there are some other kinds as well. So out of these 17 categories, 110 controls. Luckily for CMMC, it's not nearly that big. For CMMC, it's six categories and only 17 controls. So really, it's pretty straightforward stuff. You may not have been doing it, but it's not going to be rocket science or terribly expensive to implement them. The expense is going to come in when you start bringing in the auditors. That won't be cheap, but in terms of implementing them, it's quite frankly, it's largely common sense and or straightforward to implement. So don't think that you're going to go broke here. Don't think that you're going to go out of business. It's nothing like that for level one.
Yeah, and what I like to tell people too is a lot of this has to do with just good business practices, protecting things that we should have been protecting for a very long time, and to figure out, well, what is that? What do we, that you can just take a walk mentally through their business to even get a start. What is it we're trying to protect? Okay, who has access to that? And then they can kind of, start asking and creating questions. And so how would you say that those controls really apply to their business?
So how they apply to their business, you can think of it as, I mentioned earlier, this CDI covered defense information. So it's the information that's covered under CMMC. You can think of it really somewhat straightforwardly as in, you don't want anybody in your business to be able to access that CDI unless if your business is small and or if simply everybody needs it to do their job. So you want to be doing things like authorizing only the people who need access to CDI to access the CDI. So access control types of controls. You also want to be doing things like media protection. So if you have CDIs stored on, God forbid, thumb drives, shouldn't be happening, but other storage media, let's say this on servers, in storage closets, or somewhere in a data center, you also have to implement good practices there. You're either destroying that media when you're finished, or more often than not, if you're not retiring it, if you intend to reuse the media, then you're using some sort of digital scrubbing techniques. Not rocket science. You can download tools off the internet for free that do that scrubbing according to military specifications. You don't want to just delete the files because the data is still there when you delete.
And I like to always use my little USB plug here that don't use a USB that you got at a trade show or you just found somewhere. You want to make sure that you are opening it from a fresh package and you've had your eyes on it the entire time, because that is one way that bad guys spread bad things. So sometimes we don't think about it. We think, oh, what's the big deal? I got this at, whatever the convention I went to, but we don't want to be using those. No. Okay. All right. Now here's another big thing with CMMC. How about partial credit?
Yeah, so this is a little bit unfortunate. So these 17 controls that I've been referring to, for all of them that apply, and really for most organizations in the supply chain, all or virtually all, very close to all, will be applicable to those organizations. All of them need to be, for all intents and purposes, implemented perfectly. What I mean by that is, in many audits, you can say, hey, it's mostly implemented. Give me 3 months, 6 months. I'll finish, filling those gaps on this control, that control. With CMMC, it mandates perfection. So you can't have a to-do list or what the DoD calls a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. That can't exist. You have to have implemented all of those controls perfectly in order to pass the audit. Personally, I don't think that's very realistic, but that's currently what the standard says.
Yeah. So that's the big thing, is not only does everything have to be pass or fail, it's a third-party auditor that's coming in there to determine pass or fail. So, okay. So what should we do about controls for which you have nothing implemented so far?
Yeah. So this is a problem. What you should do is jump on it. Again, not all of these controls are very difficult. Many of them, most of them, are common sense and or relatively straightforward to implement. So CMMC, as it stands today, is an incomplete program. It's not fully been rolled out. It's going to be rolled out over a period of 5 years, and there are challenges that the DoD is implementing, so that may be more than 5 years. Not saying that's going to happen. That's Larry, not the DoD. But you can start implementing some of those controls almost immediately, certainly well before you need them for audit purposes. And again, we're talking here about CMMC level 1.
And then the other thing is that we want to make sure that when the auditor comes in and they're looking for evidence that these practices and policies and procedures have been put into place, they're going to want to see stuff. So you can't say, oh, well, we started that yesterday. They're going to say, show me, your visitor log for the last, however long. You can't show them a blank piece of paper and be like, well, no one's been here since yesterday. So
yeah, this is a real problem if you don't anticipate it. Not a real problem if you deal with it up front. But I mentioned earlier that you have to pass this audit with perfection. And tying into what you just said, the DoD wants to know that you've implemented those controls and they've been in place for at minimum 6 months, ideally longer than that. So if the auditor comes in and says, hey, you only implemented 80% of this control, you can't say, okay, I'll implement it by tomorrow, implement it in a couple of weeks. The answer is no. They're going to have to come back in 6 months and re-audit that control so you can prove to them that it's been in place successfully over a period of 6 months. So again, this is where you got to really get on the ball right now.
Absolutely. This is something that earlier you start, the better off you're going to be. Because if you do run into a situation like that and a contract date that you were, you won't be awarded the contract if you are not CMMC certified by the start date. So that you don't want to run into that where maybe the start date was in 4 months, but now you missed something. So now you got to get somebody to come back and not going to get back in time for that contract to start. So that's what we don't want anybody missing out on.
It's going to cost you money every time that that auditor comes back, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
They're not cheap. They're not cheap. There's no standard pricing out there, but I've never met an auditor that charged very little money.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to be a hot commodity too, because there's the demand for them is going to be greater than the supply of them. So that's also going to dictate probably market value, market price.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Not good either. So anyway, well, thank you very, very much, Larry, for all of your expertise here. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And I hope you learned a little bit about how you can get going on your CMMC journey. We hope to see you around the next time.
Thank you, Dana.